Welcome, Teksan podcast. I am with our regional director, Liam. We are going to dive deep into the role of generators in data center projects, an area that is critical to ensuring data centers operate smoothly and reliably. Thank you so much for joining me today, Liam.
Gözde, always a pleasure. Nice to be here in Turkey, sunny Turkey, of course.
Yeah, definitely.
And behind us, we have something special, right?
Yeah, definitely. Let's kick things off by talking about the role of generators in data center. As we know, uninterrupted power supply is crucial for these facilities. Could you explain in more detail how generators are essential to data center operations and why they are so important, particularly in European projects or all over the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key with the data center is the backbone, right? It's the backup. That's why we call it a backup power system. But I think ensuring things like uptime, that we've all got data flowing, right? We've all got kids' pictures, cat pictures, whatever it is, right? We've got something we need to maintain, and we've had recent history looking at things like Heathrow or Microsoft or TikTok where they go down. We're all frustrated as a people that hey, I haven't got access to my latest app. So we talk about it being the backbone. It's hugely important. We recognise actually the importance of how we deliver those solutions, be it regulatory demand, be it emissions criteria. It's quite stringent, but I think when you talk about design, design is also something that at times, they can be complicated solutions, but they can also be simplified solutions. The key for me, and I think how we have to look at a generator is it's not just a generator, it's a power solution, right?
That makes a lot of sense actually. And as you are saying, reliability is the key. So when you are working with the clients on data center project, what are the main factors they usually focus, and how do aspects like generator efficiency, capacity, and reliability influence the final decision?
Yeah, so it's kind of mixed depending on where you are in the world, right? So efficiency, capacity, sustainability. Efficiency is quite simple, right? We're all trying to create a better future. We're all trying to work towards what they call a greener, cleaner kind of journey to net zero. But it has operational effects, whether that's cost or, you can even mitigate by using your power system ultimately as your own energy source, right? In that you could turn it to a prime power system as energy prices fluctuate and change in between the grid. And I think what we're starting to see more and more of is data centers probably wanting to kind of utilise or optimise their energy usage today. When you look at what a piece of kit like this will perform, is that fuel consumption versus the power output itself, I think is something that's changed drastically over probably the last 6 to 7 years. We've gone from kind of talking about 1,000 kVA, 3 or 4 or 5 on one location, to now being able to deliver that power in one application, one generator. The footprint size that offers a data center, absolutely huge, because that means that's more white space. If you flip it on its head and look at critical infrastructure in the general side, so take a hospital, for example, that's 2 or 3 extra hospital beds because you've reduced the generator footprint. So I think the key thing that they're all looking at is reliability. So, we refer to the Uptime Institute. There's other kind of governing authorities around the world now, that are kind of really looking in. But the key element is maximising that uptime. So, we spoke about it at the start where we all miss our cat pictures or family pictures or whatever it may be. But I would say the number one feature is you can provide me a generator, but can you keep the lights on and can you keep the data flowing when it matters? And I think that's where Teksan as a manufacturer really come into their own.
It is fascinating to hear how all these elements come together. When it comes to selecting the right generator, what are the main things clients should keep in mind? How do you achieve a balance between capacity, energy efficiency, and durability in these kind of projects also?
So I've always had a motto in my career that to get something right, you have to bring the experts in, people that know what they're doing. And I think, especially in power generation, the selection of the right generator is paramount, and it's analysis and a number of other factors that we, as an engineering company, will often look at. I think first and foremost, you've got to understand the exact power need. People will often overspec. That's one of the biggest things I've seen within the power gen industry, and particularly data centres. Yes, there's risk, but overpowering or scaling out too soon can be detrimental to the generator. So you've got to be clear in what you want from the start. You're looking at different ways of doing that, but to give you an example, calculating the total load factor on the incomer. We've spoken about energy efficiency. Again, that is something that's driving at the heart of what it is. Now, anybody can provide you a generator, an engine technology, but people are pushing, as I said, towards that kind of greener, more efficient solution. So whether that is reducing the particles per minute of NOx or carbon into the atmosphere, they're all things we have to take into consideration. But what we cannot sacrifice is the performance level, right? So we have to be very, very careful that as we add these new technologies, whether it's kind of moving towards EPA Tier 4 in the USA, whether it's Stage 5 within Europe, although for mobile rental, we're seeing SCR being applied to larger generators like this. And I think that's something that plays very much in the heart of putting the right generator in. But one of the key elements, and you probably see it in the background, is the control of that generator. So the electronics now, this is a MUI operated generator, or MUI operated engine, and understanding the importance of what that delivers. This is the most efficient engine that Perkins have delivered into the power generation market for a generation. So sizing, energy efficiency, and ultimately durability, I think are something that we've got to look. But I think that again is a strength of how the industries move forward, and especially Teksan, is that we ensure that a data centre's uptime is maximised, we're cost effective, but we're driving sustainability over a longer term.
Yes. I can imagine that challenges must arise during such complex projects. What are some of the biggest obstacles faced when integrating generators into data center systems? How do you help your clients overcome those hurdles, actually?
It goes back to the expert piece, right? Offering sage advice at an early segment. When you're in talks and you're talking about products and introducing what you do, I think people need to be reassured they're working with the right people. Like I say, anybody can sell a generator, but for the data center segment, it takes a certain skill set. And I think the biggest challenge I've probably seen is incorrectly integrated systems into the power distribution system as a whole. So working across multiple supply chains, collaborating with partners involved in that build, from effectively specification at stage 1 through to build and delivery. And I think it's not about just providing the backup power, it's making sure it's seamless. We're maximising delivery, we're ensuring we're meeting stringent targets that ensure that they're making money as quickly as possible. Ultimately, they're both mechanical and electrical systems, and failures can happen. That's the nature of products, right? Yeah. So you've also got to take into account that when you're selecting a supplier, having solid aftermarket is absolutely huge. We're in 140 countries. I've mentioned that already, right? But you look at some of the supply chains we work with, they're in more countries than that. That means that as we move into those countries and grow as an organisation, we know we've got aftercare support. And I think that's something we have to remember. These investments, because that is what these power generation equipments are, they're huge investments that need looking after. They need careful maintenance to ensure they last for as long as possible. But go back to the first point that we made around reliability and uptime, is to make sure with good aftercare, it hits it every time.
Sustainability is such a big focus these days, especially in Europe.
Yeah.
How do environmental regulation and sustainability trends affect the selection of generators? What are some of the innovative, eco-friendly solutions that are being used in that projects also, in data center projects?
So I think environmental concerns generally are very central to decisions we as a business take. So when you work in as many regions as we do, we have multiple kind of criteria that we have to meet within the design, and certainly stringent environment laws that we kind of have to adhere to. And I think it's not that clients are keen to stick to those principles, it's that in theory we should naturally stick to those principles. Evolution into this net zero journey, trying to just, as I say, deliver a better future, we've got to make sure they're hitting their targets, and that starts with us hitting our commitments and targets. And I think if you look at the many kind of incentives and drives that there are, the UN SDG, from a simple thing as putting rubbish in a bin to ensuring you're using efficient products is good. And I think what's really, really interesting is a lot of the manufacturers now are moving towards different fuel within the GENDA, the Turkish Association for Power Generation. I represent them within Europe Gen, and some of the work we're trying to do is work more closely with the data centres to say, look, don't alienate diesel, because that's the wrong message.
Yeah.
We need to work with it, we need to be wise, because we're doing a lot of work that goes unnoticed, driving towards a better and cleaner future, as we've pointed out on several occasions.
Technology is rapidly advancing, and I imagine that innovation like digital control systems and hybrid solutions are really changing the way generators function. Can you share how these technological advancements are influencing the way data centers are powered?
Data centers are revolutionising, evolution, whatever that may be. They really are kind of, because they're a technological industry generally, they're typically very fast-paced in terms of how they want to bring something forward. And I'll always say we've got to err a bit of caution in there, because there's technologies that people are trying to bring through that, in theory, they're sticking plasters, right? Let's put it out there, they're sticking plasters. They're not going to solve the long-term aim. But I think there's some really good initiatives out there. So let's look at where we are. So gases have been around for a fair while and offers a great kind of a great stable supply chain for a medium-term solution. But again, there are challenges within that in terms of its life cycle, load capability, start load, etc. There's a lot of challenges yet to be overcome. If you take the likes of kind of battery technology, we're working on the test system, right?
Right.
This is something we've been immensely proud of and pushed really hard to achieve. And I think as that technology gets better, that's going to make things really interesting, because can you imagine having energy storage systems mixed with, whether it's wind or solar or hydro, and then having your backup power generation source? We're into the microgrid conversation, and we're now starting to see data centres actually go, well, I'm putting pressure on the grid, I'm struggling to get connectivity to the grid, so how can I do something different? Well, why don't I look at self-generation? And I think self-generation could be an interesting one. And I think, again, I will often say this, and okay, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but
No.
hey, look, is diesel going anywhere soon? No. Will it go in my generation? No. And why is that? It's because it's 100-plus-year-old technology in terms of the oil reciprocating engine, in that it is proven, it's stable, but my God, it is the most reliable technology we have on the planet to date. But it goes back to a lot of what's inside here behind us, the technological advances in the last 10 years on that platform alone are like nothing that has been seen. So steps are being taken, steps are being made. We have to recognise the good work being done.
And the energy efficiency must play a major role in the cost management for data centers. Can you explain how energy efficient generators impact operational cost and what advice you offer clients to help them achieve long-term saving?
Yeah, so again, if you look at the advance in technology in terms of, fuel injection, etc., driving, better kind of less displacing platforms within a generator, is that how that technology works ultimately determines how much fuel is burned, obviously mixed in with how the engine operates. And then that looks at, when you kind of price it per kilowatt as a consumer, you've got to make it, you've got to make it worthwhile. And I think that again is something they're absolutely looking at. And I think if we look at running the power source, whether it's prime, whether it's DCC, standby, it's about getting it to work within peak efficiency. If you want it to be, kind of a money-making type asset or something that will certainly pay itself off over time, it's got to be efficient. And you've got to be aiming to reduce that long-term fuel consumption. And that's where the technological mix kind of comes in. But I think what I'll always say is, yes, at times it is really scary when you look at the cost of the generator at an initial outlay. But when you're then looking at, some great data warehouse, the cost is quite minimal in comparison. And actually, like I said, I called it earlier, a generator is a solid investment. And that's the key word, it's an investment. That bit of equipment will last you for a long, long time, as long as you look after it back. So when you then look at that upfront cost and you cost it over its life cycle, actually it's very cost efficient longer term. It's looking longer term rather than just like we do when we go in the shop and we look at, the latest pair of Adidas trainers and or a Gucci handbag and we like fall off a seat. Actually, it's a great investment.
That's really insightful also. The security is another big factor. And how do generators contribute to the security and uninterrupted power supply in data center, particularly in the event of the power failures or outages?
So, look at it this way. We talk about it being essential to running in the backup perspective, but, whether you've lost grid supply, primary grid supply, the ability to change now and dependent on design kind of between A and B incomer. If both incomers fail, you kind of need a smart system that's going to pick up and deliver pretty quickly. There are solutions out there in the power industry. You probably can get power on in less than 10 seconds. That's mind-blowing that something of that size, 2,500 kVA of power delivered in less than 10 seconds. But, again, advancements in controller technologies, using things like closed before excitation or dead sync bus are hugely important. So it's not just the big black thing behind us or the white alternator. There's a small little brain in there that allows that to happen. And I think we keep referencing this word reliability, but it is key to call it out because, like we said, it's the number one thing that data centers are looking at. Alarm systems, cameras, everything has to be up and running to ensure, these sites are secure. So that makes reliability an even higher factor to look at. And I think, again, making sure you're working with the right supply chains absolutely ensures that you're maximising your uptime message.
Okay. Looking at and what change do you foresee in the role of generators in data centers, and how will new technologies continue to shape the features of these projects also?
Look, there's been talk of some really interesting technologies, right? We've heard batteries, we've seen hydrogen, you know, we've seen people looking at floating solar, you know. Well, let me be sure, floating solar might work here in Turkey off the Marmara. However, in all truth and essence, it's not going to work in the Nordics, you know, when it's minus 30 degrees. So you've got to take in a number of factors. You know, people have spoken about hydrogen. You know, there's a whole raft of work that is light years ahead. You know, kind of looks really interesting, but we're miles yet to tread that road. We've got gas, which is a proven technology, but it has challenges that we need to address, and we work with the supply chains to do that. The microgrid solution, or the mini grid, depending on how you're going to mix those technologies, for me, I think is something I can see coming to the fore. I also see some of the kind of maybe the more advanced technologies coming forward in terms of fuels. So, you know, just this weekend we've spoken about methanol. And methanol is a really interesting fuel because it's clean burn. And when you've got a clean burn fuel, well, go back to several of the points we've talked about, efficiency plays at the heart of it. So, you know, I think you've got to look at what's going to come forward. As I say, the oil reciprocating engine has been around for a long, long time. It's a proven-based technology that delivers over and over again. I think the solve is finding the fuel that is a puzzle in that. It is the final piece in that puzzle for a better future for our children, right?
Right. Before we wrap up, for professionals who are just starting in this industry or those working on their first data center project, what advice would you give when it comes to selecting and managing generators? What should they focus on for long-term success?
So for me, you know, and I've spoken about it this weekend. I've spoken about it for the last. I feel like I harp on about it a lot, but I think it's an important point. It's collaboration. And collaboration is driven by a number of factors, and I think two of those are thinking holistically, so outside of the box, being a bit different, you know, trying to challenge the norm, because I am a firm believer that nothing changes if nothing changes. But by thinking kind of more strategically in that, is that we're not looking at just price, we're not looking at it being a diesel. We're actually looking at the bigger picture. Well, how can I help change it? What can I do that brings commitment from multiple industries? And not doing what we've always done. You know, nobody, myself included, nobody is trying to reinvent the wheel. What we're actually trying to do is challenge ourselves, and sometimes by collaborating, we have different voices and different opinions that can help guide us to that end aim. And I think it's be open, be fair, be honest. You know, people will get assigned to a particular brand or a particular association, and there's nothing wrong with that. But don't close yourself off. You know, I've often. I will often look at a number of factors in my career, and I think it's the fact that I've always led with open eyes rather than a blinkered approach. I like to see new things. I like to try new things. Yeah. You know, that's why I work for a global company. That's why I work, you know, for a Turkish manufacturer. I think Turkey's offering to the world, it isn't just something that's happened in the last 30 years here at Teksan. It's something that's spanned generations for thousands of years. You know, it's a great place to be, a great place to manufacture, and it's a great network to be a part of. And the company's mindset of allowing us to be innovative and explore is something that definitely appeals to me. And I think I would offer that to anybody when you're choosing careers, options. Keep your eyes open. Think strategically, think holistically, be different.
Definitely, I'm with you. So, thank you so much for being here,
Always
Liam,
a pleasure.
and for your all valuable insights today also, and you giving us a true look into how generators support the backbone of data center infrastructure and how innovation and sustainability are shaping their future. To our listeners, we hope this episode helped shed light on the critical role that backup power systems play in ensuring smooth, secure, and sustainable operation. Stay tuned for our next episode, and until then, take care and keep innovating.
Teşekkür ederim.
Teşekkür ederim.